The classroom was unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, warming the rows of small wooden desks. Mrs. Carter adjusted the stack of spelling worksheets in her hands, while the children whispered and giggled in their seats. It was an ordinary day, predictable, structured, safe. Until the dog refused to move. The golden retriever, usually calm and perfectly trained, sat just inside the classroom door. He wasn't wagging. He wasn't panting happily like he usually did during reading hour. Instead, he stared, unblinking, at the closed door across the hall. Mrs. Carter frowned. "Buddy," she called softly. The dog didn't respond. A low whine vibrated in his throat. Not loud enough to frighten anyone, just enough to make the hairs on Mrs. Carter's arms rise. The children began to notice. One little girl stopped mid-sentence. A boy leaned forward in his chair. Buddy stood suddenly. He walked toward the door, pressed his nose to the crack beneath it, then looked back at Mrs. Carter, eyes wide, almost pleading. Mrs. Carter felt her chest tighten. Therapy dogs didn't act like this without reason. She took a cautious step forward, her heart beginning to pound in a way she couldn't explain. Then she saw it. The small laminated name taped beside the classroom door. And everything inside her went still. But what the dog sensed was far from ordinary. Before we continue, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-touching dog stories. And tell me, where are you watching from? The morning began like most others. Soft sunlight slipped through the tall classroom windows, stretching across the polished floor in long golden lines. Dust floated gently in the air, visible only when it passed through the light. Outside, the late September breeze stirred red and amber leaves across the playground. Inside room 12, the day felt steady, predictable, safe. Mrs. Carter stood near the whiteboard, smoothing the front of her cardigan as the children settled into their seats. The faint scent of dry erase marker and freshly sharpened pencils lingered in the air. Backpacks rustled. A chair leg scraped softly against the tile. "Okay, everyone," she said gently. "Reading circle." A ripple of excitement moved through the room, because reading circle meant Buddy. The golden retriever lay near the reading rug, his thick coat catching the sunlight. His tail thumped lazily against the floor as the children gathered around him. He had been visiting the classroom twice a week since spring. A certified therapy dog with patient eyes and a calm presence that seemed to soften even the most restless students. He wore his blue vest neatly across his shoulders. He always seemed to know exactly who needed him. Mrs. Carter watched as little Hannah rested her hand on Buddy's back while sounding out words from her book. The dog didn't move, didn't fidget. He simply breathed slowly, steadily, as if lending her his calm. It was an ordinary moment, the kind teachers cherish, the kind that feel like quiet victories. Mrs. Carter leaned against her desk, arms loosely folded, listening to the soft cadence of young voices reading aloud. Then Buddy's tail stopped moving. It wasn't dramatic, just still. His ears twitched first. A small movement, almost imperceptible. He lifted his head. Across the room, the classroom door stood slightly ajar, opening into the hallway. The hallway lights hummed faintly beyond it. Lockers lined the opposite wall. A bulletin board displayed construction paper apples with children's names written in bright marker. Buddy stared at the doorway, unblinking. Mrs. Carter noticed the shift immediately. She had worked with therapy dogs long enough to understand their rhythms. Buddy was rarely distracted, especially not during reading time. "Hannah, that was wonderful," she said softly, her eyes still on the dog. Buddy stood. Slowly. Not excited. Not playful. Alert. His body straightened, muscles subtly tightening beneath his fur. His tail hung still, now lowered slightly. His ears angled forward. He took one careful step toward the classroom door. Then another. The children paused. "Is Buddy going somewhere?" whispered Caleb. Mrs. Carter gave a reassuring smile. He probably heard something, but her voice carried a thin thread of uncertainty. Buddy reached the doorway and stopped. He didn't step into the hall. He simply stood there, nose lifted slightly, inhaling, listening. The hallway was quiet. No running feet. No loud voices. Just the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the soft echo of a classroom door closing somewhere farther down the corridor. Buddy let out a low sound. Not a bark. A whine. Soft. Almost fragile. Mrs. Carter's chest tightened. She walked toward him, kneeling beside him near the doorway. "Hey, buddy," she murmured, resting her hand lightly against his shoulder. His fur felt warm beneath her palm, but he didn't look at her. His eyes remained fixed across the hall, at the closed classroom door directly opposite theirs. Room 14. Mrs. Carter followed his gaze. The door was shut. A laminated sheet of paper had been taped beside it, a temporary name sign. The school often did that when new students arrived mid-semester. Buddy's breathing changed. Shallow. Focused. He took a half-step forward and gently pressed his nose against the thin crack at the bottom of the hallway air draft. He inhaled deeply. Then he leaned back slightly and looked at Mrs. Carter. His eyes were different now. Wider. Searching. As if asking something. "What is it?" she whispered. Behind her, the classroom remained silent. 20 small faces watched from the reading rug. Buddy moved again. This time he stepped fully into the hallway. Mrs. Carter hesitated only a moment before standing and following him. She motioned for the children to stay seated. The hallway felt cooler than the classroom. The air carried a faint scent of disinfectant and pencil shavings. Fluorescent lights cast a pale glow against the lockers. Buddy approached the door of room 14. Slowly. Deliberately. His tail stayed low, not tucked, just thoughtful. His ears were forward. His body steady but tense. He stopped inches from the door and stared. Mrs. Carter felt her pulse begin to thud in her ears. This wasn't random behavior. This wasn't distraction. Buddy had never fixated like this before. She stepped closer, her shoes clicking softly against the tile. That's when she noticed the name taped beside the door. White paper. Bold black letters. Neatly printed. She froze. Her breath caught somewhere between inhale and exhale. The name was familiar. Painfully familiar. But she couldn't yet understand why. Behind the closed door, a chair scraped faintly across the floor. Buddy's head tilted slightly. He let out another soft whine, this one longer. More urgent. Mrs. Carter placed her hand against her chest without realizing it. Her heart was beating faster now. "Buddy," she whispered. He lifted one paw and gently tapped the door. Once. Then again. Not scratching. Not demanding. Just knocking. The hallway felt impossibly still. Mrs. Carter's mind raced through possibilities. A scent? A memory? A coincidence? She glanced back toward her classroom, then back at the name on the door. Something inside her shifted. A memory flickered at the edge of her thoughts. But what the dog sensed was far from ordinary. The hallway felt longer than it had a moment ago. Mrs. Carter stood beside Buddy, her fingers resting lightly against the fabric of his blue vest. The name on the paper beside room 14 seemed to blur the longer she stared at it. Ethan Marshall. She whispered it silently in her mind. Ethan. The name brushed against something buried in memory, like the faint echo of a song she hadn't heard in years. Buddy let out another quiet whine. Not loud. Not disruptive. But persistent. He leaned forward again, nose hovering just above the crack beneath the door. His tail moved once, slow and uncertain, before going still. Inside room 14 someone laughed. A child's voice. Then the sound of a chair shifting. Mrs. Carter blinked, pulling herself back to the present. She forced a steady breath. "It's okay," she murmured, though she wasn't sure whether she was speaking to Buddy or herself. The classroom behind her remained calm. Her students were still seated on the rug, whispering softly among themselves. She couldn't just stand here. She reached gently for Buddy's leash. "Come on, Buddy. Back inside." Normally, he would respond immediately. He always did. But this time he didn't move. His body remained angled toward the door. His posture wasn't rigid, just anchored, focused in a way that felt intentional. Mrs. Carter felt a small thread of unease wind tighter in her chest. She gave the leash a gentle tug. Buddy turned his head slowly toward her. His eyes met hers. And held. There was no panic in them. No fear. Just something steady. Something knowing. It made her hesitate. She swallowed. "Buddy." He blinked once. Then looked back at the door. Inside the room, a softer sound drifted through the hallway. Not laughter this time. A cough. Short. Dry. Then silence. Buddy's ears lifted. His nose pressed closer to the crack beneath the door, inhaling deeply again, as if memorizing a scent carried in the recycled air of the building. Mrs. Carter felt her heartbeat thrum louder in her ears. She stepped closer to the door herself, leaning slightly as if she could somehow hear more clearly. But there was nothing unusual. Just the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the muffled rhythm of another teacher speaking. "Buddy," she tried again, firmer now. "Heel." He obeyed, but only halfway. He stepped back from the door, moving beside her, yet his body remained angled toward it. His gaze didn't shift. He wasn't resisting. He was reluctant. And that was different. Mrs. Carter guided him gently back toward room 12. Each step away from the door seemed heavier for him. He walked slowly, glancing over his shoulder twice, as if worried about leaving something unfinished. The children straightened when she re-entered the classroom. "Is everything okay?" Hannah asked. "Yes," Mrs. Carter replied automatically. "Everything's fine." But her voice felt thinner than usual. Buddy returned to the reading rug, but he didn't lie down. He sat instead, posture tall, ears alert. He wasn't relaxed anymore. Caleb reached out to pat his back, but Buddy barely reacted. His eyes drifted back toward the open doorway across the hall. Mrs. Carter resumed the reading circle. "Okay, who's next?" Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. As one of the boys began reading aloud, Buddy shifted again. A small sound vibrated in his throat, barely audible but there. A low, restrained whimper. Mrs. Carter's stomach tightened. She had worked with therapy animals for years. She knew their subtle cues, the language of ears, tail, breath. Buddy wasn't anxious. He was attentive, listening to something only he could detect. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Each time a noise echoed faintly from the hallway. A locker door closing, a teacher's footsteps. Buddy's head lifted instantly. Focused. Waiting. The rest of his body remained calm. But his eyes were searching. Mrs. Carter found herself glancing toward the hallway more often than she wanted to admit. Ethan Marshall. The name echoed again in her thoughts. A new transfer student, the principal had mentioned yesterday during staff meeting. Quiet. Recently moved from out of state. Adjusting. She tried to recall more details, but nothing specific came to mind. Still, something about that name tugged at her. A memory of another child years ago. A parent-teacher conference. A drawing of a golden dog taped to a refrigerator in a classroom photo. She shook her head slightly, trying to clear the haze. This was coincidence. It had to be. Buddy shifted again. This time he stood abruptly. The movement startled the children. "Whoa," Caleb whispered. Buddy walked toward the door once more, slower than before but determined. His nails clicked softly against the tile. He stopped at the threshold and stared across the hall again. Mrs. Carter felt heat rise behind her eyes, not from fear, but from the weight of something she couldn't yet name. "Buddy, come," she said softly. He didn't move. Instead, he sat down at the doorway, guarding it, watching, waiting. His tail curled around his paws, but his back remained straight. Another sound drifted from room 14. This time it wasn't laughter. It wasn't coughing. It was silence. A heavy kind of silence, the kind that feels different from ordinary quiet. Buddy's breathing changed again. Slower. Deeper. As if steadying himself. Mrs. Carter stood slowly, heart pounding harder now. She walked to the doorway and stood beside him. The hallway stretched before them, pale and still. Across the way, the laminated paper fluttered slightly in the recycled air. Ethan Marshall. Buddy's nose twitched once more. Then he let out a sound Mrs. Carter had never heard from him before. Not a whine. Not a bark. A soft, broken exhale, almost like a sigh carrying sadness. And suddenly, Mrs. Carter realized something that made her chest ache. Buddy wasn't reacting to a threat. He was responding to a feeling. Moments later, everything began to shift. By mid-morning, the rhythm of the classroom had returned, at least on the surface. Math worksheets replaced storybooks. Pencils scratched steadily across paper. The clock above the whiteboard ticked with mechanical patience. But Buddy hadn't settled. He lay near Mrs. Carter's desk now, Not stretched out as usual, but curled loosely, head lifted, eyes open. His ears flicked at every small sound drifting from the hallway. Each time a locker shut. Each time a door opened. Each time footsteps passed. He watched. Waited. Mrs. Carter tried to focus on helping Caleb with subtraction, but her gaze kept drifting back to the golden retriever. She knew his patterns. Knew the gentle sigh he gave before napping. Knew the lazy tail thump he offered when a child approached. This wasn't that. This was quiet vigilance. "Buddy's being weird today," Hannah whispered from her desk. Mrs. Carter offered a soft smile. "He's just curious." But the words felt rehearsed. Unconvincing. As if Buddy understood he was being discussed, he rose again. Slowly. Deliberately. He walked toward the classroom door. Stopped at the threshold. Stared. Room 14 sat directly across the hall, the white paper with Ethan Marshall's name still taped neatly beside it. The corners had begun to curl slightly. Buddy's nose lifted. He inhaled. Held it. Exhaled through his nose with a faint tremor. Mrs. Carter stood from her desk this time without thinking. "Class, continue working quietly." Her shoes clicked softly as she joined him. The hallway seemed quieter than earlier. The light felt harsher now, midday brightness filtering through narrow windows at the far end. Buddy stepped out. She followed. He crossed halfway into the hallway, stopping directly in front of room 14. His posture wasn't tense in a fearful way. It was purposeful. He leaned forward, pressing his nose gently against the base of the door once more. Inhale. Pause. Inhale again. Mrs. Carter listened carefully. Inside the room, she could faintly hear a teacher speaking. A calm voice explaining something about spelling patterns. The occasional shuffle of paper. Ordinary sounds. Nothing alarming. "Buddy," she said softly, "there's nothing there." He didn't respond. Instead, his tail gave a single slow movement, not wagging, just acknowledging something she couldn't perceive. Then he sat. Right there in the hallway, facing the door. Mrs. Carter felt her stomach tighten. This was the third time. The third time he had returned to this exact spot. Not wandering. Not distracted. Returning. A pattern. A repetition. As if something inside him refused to let it go. The door to room 14 opened suddenly. Mrs. Carter startled slightly. A tall woman with dark hair stepped out. Mrs. Alvarez, the new fourth-grade teacher. "Oh," she said, surprised. "Hi." "Hi," Mrs. Carter replied, forcing a smile. "Sorry if we're in the way." Buddy remained seated, but his eyes shifted instantly past Mrs. Alvarez, into the classroom beyond. Mrs. Carter followed his gaze. Rows of desks. Bright posters. Children bent over notebooks. And in the far corner, near the window, a boy sitting alone, smaller than most of the others. Dark hair falling into his eyes. Still. Very still. The boy wasn't writing. He wasn't looking around. He was simply sitting there. Mrs. Carter's heart gave a slow, heavy thud. Buddy stood. Not abruptly. Not excitedly. Just rising. He took one careful step forward. Mrs. Alvarez noticed. "Is he okay?" "Yes," Mrs. Carter replied quickly. "He's a therapy dog. He just..." She stopped. Because at that exact moment, the boy in the corner lifted his head. His eyes moved across the room. And landed on Buddy. Everything seemed to slow. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly. A page turned somewhere. A chair leg scraped softly against the tile. But the boy and the dog didn't look away. Buddy's ears softened, folding slightly backward. Not in fear, but in recognition. His body language changed in an instant. The tension eased from his shoulders. His tail lowered gently, then gave one slow, hesitant wag. The boy's lips parted. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. But his expression shifted, like something fragile inside him had just cracked open. Mrs. Carter felt her breath catch. "Ethan," Mrs. Alvarez said gently from inside the room. "Everything okay?" The boy blinked as if pulled back from somewhere far away. "Yes," he answered quietly. His voice barely carried into the hallway. Buddy took another small step forward. Mrs. Carter instinctively placed her hand on his vest. Not restraining, just grounding. Because something was happening. Something quiet. Something deeper than coincidence. The door slowly closed again. The moment ended. But it didn't feel finished. Buddy remained standing for several seconds after the latch clicked into place. Then he sat once more, facing the door, waiting. Mrs. Carter knelt beside him in the hallway. Her pulse was steady now but heavy. "Do you know him?" she whispered, even though she knew that sounded impossible. Buddy's gaze stayed fixed ahead, but his breathing softened, as if he had found what he'd been searching for. Inside her chest, a memory began to surface more clearly now. A little boy from years ago, a conference room, tear-stained cheeks, a drawing of a golden retriever taped carefully to a folder. Mrs. Carter closed her eyes briefly. It couldn't be. Too many years had passed. Too many changes. And yet, Buddy shifted closer to the door, resting his chin lightly against the cool surface. Not pushing, not scratching, just leaning, like someone keeping quiet company. Mrs. Carter's throat tightened. This wasn't curiosity. It wasn't distraction. It was connection. And she was beginning to realize Buddy wasn't going to stop returning to that door. Not until something else did. The hallway felt different after that moment. Quieter. Heavier. Mrs. Carter remained kneeling beside Buddy long after the door to room 14 had closed. His chin rested gently against the cool surface, his breath fogging the lower panel in soft, rhythmic bursts. He wasn't restless anymore. He wasn't confused. He was certain. That was what unsettled her most. "Come on," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. "Let's give them space." Buddy lifted his head slowly, but he didn't step away right away. He glanced up at her first, and in that look there was something steady, something patient, as if he trusted that she would understand soon. Mrs. Carter stood and smoothed her cardigan again, trying to quiet the tremor in her hands. She glanced at the white sheet of paper taped beside the door. Ethan Marshall. The black letters were bold and clean, freshly printed. The tape at the corners slightly crooked. She stared at the name longer this time. Marshall. The memory that had been flickering at the edge of her mind finally pressed forward. 5 years ago. A different school. A different building across town. She had been teaching second grade then. There had been a boy, quiet, bright-eyed, inseparable from his golden retriever. He used to talk about that dog constantly during writing assignments. "His name is Rusty," the boy had said once, hugging his journal to his chest. "He waits for me at the door every day." Mrs. Carter's breath slowed. She remembered the drawing now. Crayons pressed too hard against thin paper. A golden dog with wide brown eyes and a crooked smile. Rusty. The boy's last name had been Marshall. Her heart thudded once. Deep and unmistakable. But that had been years ago. Children grew. Families moved. Life shifted. Couldn't be the same Ethan. Could it? Buddy shifted beside her, breaking her thoughts. He stood again and stepped closer to the name on the door. This time, instead of looking beneath it, he raised his nose slightly, inhaling near the paper itself, as if scent lingered there, as if the hallway air carried something familiar. Mrs. Carter swallowed. "You remember something," she murmured. He let out a soft exhale. Not a whine this time, more like a sigh. Footsteps approached from down the hall. Mrs. Alvarez returned, carrying a stack of graded papers. She slowed when she saw them still standing there. "Everything all right?" she asked gently. "Yes," Mrs. Carter replied, though her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. "I just noticed your new student. Ethan." Mrs. Alvarez nodded. "Sweet kid. Very quiet. Just moved here from Oregon, I think. Still adjusting." Oregon. Mrs. Carter's fingers tightened slightly around Buddy's leash. "Does he?" She hesitated. "Does he have any siblings?" Mrs. Alvarez tilted her head thoughtfully. "Not that I know of." His mom filled out the paperwork. Single parent. A memory sharpened painfully. A parent-teacher meeting years ago. A tired mother with kind eyes. A boy sitting beside her, clutching a leash in his small hands. Mrs. Carter felt the air thin around her. "Has he mentioned having a dog?" she asked carefully. Mrs. Alvarez's expression softened. Actually, yes. He wrote about one in his introduction essay. Said he used to have a golden retriever. Lost him last year. Lost him. The words landed quietly, but firmly. Buddy's ears twitched. His body stilled. Mrs. Carter felt her throat tighten. What happened? She asked. Car accident, I think, Mrs. Alvarez said gently. It was hard on him. He doesn't talk much about it. Silence settled between them. Buddy stepped closer to the door again and sat, directly beneath the name. Mrs. Carter's eyes filled before she could stop them. Rusty. The golden retriever from years ago. The dog Ethan had written about in nearly every journal entry. The dog he'd drawn again and again. Mrs. Carter looked down at Buddy. The resemblance was impossible to ignore now. Same warm amber coat. Same intelligent eyes. Same gentle posture. Not identical, but close enough to stir something deep. Too close to dismiss. He's been reacting to this door all morning, Mrs. Carter said quietly. He won't leave it alone. Mrs. Alvarez watched Buddy for a moment. The dog's tail lay relaxed against the floor, but his gaze remained fixed ahead, patient, unwavering. That's interesting, she murmured. Inside room 14, the bell rang softly, signaling a transition to the next subject. Chairs shifted. Children's voices rose briefly, then softened again. Buddy's head lifted. He stood. His body language changed once more. Not tense, not anxious. Hopeful. Mrs. Carter felt it too. That gentle pull. As if something unfinished had circled back around. The classroom door opened again as Mrs. Alvarez stepped inside to prepare her students for recess. Mrs. Carter remained in the hallway with Buddy. She stared once more at the name taped to the wall. Ethan Marshall. Her heart whispered what her mind was still hesitant to accept. Some connections don't disappear with time. Some bonds don't fade, they wait. Buddy shifted closer to her leg, pressing lightly against it, grounding her, steadying her. Mrs. Carter knelt beside him again, her voice soft against his fur. If it's him, she whispered, then maybe you're here for a reason. Buddy's tail moved once. Slow. Sure. And for the first time that morning, Mrs. Carter understood that this wasn't coincidence. It was something else. Something patient. Something that had been quietly waiting for this exact door to open. Recess arrived with a rush of noise. Sneakers squeaked against tile. Backpacks thudded shut. Children poured into the hallway in loose, laughing clusters. Mrs. Carter stood just outside her classroom door with Buddy at her side, her hand resting gently on the curve of his neck. She hadn't planned to be here. But she hadn't been able to walk away either. Room 14's door opened. Students streamed out in twos and threes. Bright jackets. Quick footsteps. Voices overlapping. Buddy stayed still, though every muscle in his body felt alert beneath her palm. Then near the back of the line Ethan appeared. He moved more slowly than the others. Hands tucked into the straps of his backpack. Shoulders slightly rounded. He kept his gaze down at the floor tiles as he stepped into the hallway. Buddy inhaled sharply. It wasn't loud, but Mrs. Carter felt it. A shift. A recognition. The dog's tail lifted slightly. Not wagging wildly, just rising with quiet anticipation. Ethan took 3 more steps forward. Then he looked up. His eyes met Buddy's. The hallway noise seemed to soften around them. Not disappear. Just blur at the edges. Buddy's ears folded back gently, his expression softening in an instant. His tail began to move now, slow, steady, careful. Ethan stopped walking. The other children passed him without noticing. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, staring. Mrs. Carter felt her heart press hard against her ribs. She released a slow breath. Ethan, she said gently. His eyes flickered toward her voice, then back to Buddy. The golden retriever took 1 step forward. Careful. Measured. He didn't pull. Didn't jump. He just moved closer, as if approaching something fragile. Ethan's lips parted slightly. His fingers loosened from his backpack straps. Buddy stopped about 3 feet away. Sat down. And waited. His tail swept softly against the tile floor. Ethan swallowed. "Rusty," he whispered. The word was barely audible, but it carried. Mrs. Carter felt tears sting her eyes. Buddy tilted his head slightly at the sound of the name. His ears remained soft, relaxed. He leaned forward just a little, not enough to invade space, just enough to invite. Ethan stepped closer. One slow step. Then another. He crouched down, tentative at first, like he wasn't sure if this moment was real. Buddy didn't move. He didn't rush. He simply held eye contact. Ethan's hand hovered in the air for a second, trembling slightly. Then it touched Buddy's fur. A soft gasp escaped him. Warm. Solid. Real. Buddy leaned gently into the touch. His eyes closed for a brief moment, as if memorizing the contact. Ethan's shoulders began to shake. Not violently. Just small tremors. "I know you're not him," he said softly, voice cracking. "I know you're not." He stopped. Mrs. Carter knelt down beside them, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "Buddy's a therapy dog," she explained quietly. "He comes to help when someone needs him." Ethan didn't look up. His fingers pressed deeper into the golden fur. "He looks just like him," he whispered. "Exactly like him." Buddy shifted closer. Carefully. He lowered himself to the floor and gently rested his chin on Ethan's knee. The gesture was simple. Instinctive. Protective. Ethan let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob, more like a release. The kind of sound that comes from holding something in for too long. Mrs. Carter felt her chest ache. "Rusty used to wait for me at the door every day," Ethan said, eyes fixed on Buddy. "When I got home from school, he'd be right there." Buddy's tail moved slowly against the tile. Ethan wiped at his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. "He died last year," he continued, voice unsteady. "A car hit him when he ran after me. I didn't see the truck." The hallway felt impossibly quiet now. Children's laughter echoed faintly from outside through the open doors at the end of the corridor. A breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of cut grass. Buddy lifted his head slightly and nudged Ethan's hand. Not demanding, just reminding. "I'm here." Ethan looked into Buddy's eyes again. Something shifted there. The sharpness of grief softened into something warmer. Not replacement. Not forgetting. Just comfort. Mrs. Carter placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You loved him very much," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "I still do." Buddy leaned his full weight gently against Ethan's legs now, steady and warm. His breathing slow, deep and even, offering calm without words. Ethan wrapped both arms around the dog's neck. Not tightly. Just enough to feel the solid reassurance of fur and muscle in life. Mrs. Carter watched the way Buddy adjusted himself. Careful not to overwhelm, careful not to pull away. He simply stayed. Present. Patient. After a few moments, Ethan's breathing began to steady. The trembling eased. He pulled back slightly, though one hand remained tangled in golden fur. "I thought maybe," he began, then hesitated. "I thought maybe I was imagining it when I saw him earlier." Buddy's ears flicked. "You saw him before?" Mrs. Carter asked gently. Ethan nodded. "Through the classroom door. I thought my brain was just playing tricks." Buddy leaned forward again and gave a soft, gentle lick to Ethan's knuckles. Ethan let out a small, shaky laugh. He used to do that too. Mrs. Carter felt warmth spread through her chest. Not the sharp ache from earlier. Something softer. Healing. "You don't have to replace Rusty," she said quietly. "But sometimes, when we lose someone we love, the world finds small ways to remind us that love doesn't disappear." Ethan looked at her. Then at Buddy. The golden retriever's tail gave another slow wag. The bell rang faintly in the distance, signaling the end of recess. Children began filing back inside. Ethan stood slowly. Buddy rose with him. For a brief moment, the boy rested his forehead against the dog's head. Eyes closed. Breathing steady. When he stepped back, his face was still damp, but lighter. Less guarded. "Can he come visit our class sometime?" Ethan asked quietly. Mrs. Carter smiled through her tears. "I think he already decided he will." Buddy stood between them, calm and grounded. As if this was exactly where he was meant to be. And for the first time since that quiet Tuesday morning began, everything made sense. The afternoon settled into a quieter rhythm. Sunlight shifted across the classroom floor, turning from bright gold to a softer amber. Outside, the wind had calmed. Leaves rested in small clusters along the fence near the playground. Mrs. Carter sat at her desk during planning period, her hands folded loosely in front of her. Buddy lay at her feet, resting now, but not deeply asleep. Every so often, his ears twitched at the sound of footsteps passing in the hallway, as if he was still listening, still aware. There was a soft knock at her door. Mrs. Carter looked up. "Come in." Ethan stepped inside, hesitating just past the threshold. Mrs. Alvarez stood behind him, offering a small, reassuring nod before continuing down the hallway. Ethan held his backpack against his chest. Buddy lifted his head immediately. Not abruptly, just attentive. His tail thumped once against the floor. Ethan noticed. A small, almost shy smile touched his lips. "Hi," Mrs. Carter said gently. "You can sit wherever you'd like." Ethan chose the reading rug. Buddy stood and walked toward him, slow, measured steps, as if mindful of the space between them. When he reached the rug, he circled once and lowered himself beside Ethan, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Ethan didn't flinch. He exhaled instead. A long breath he'd been holding. Mrs. Carter sat across from them, cross-legged on the rug. She kept her voice soft. "You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to," she said. Ethan nodded. His fingers found their way into Buddy's fur again, moving gently along the thick golden coat. The repetitive motion seemed to steady him. For a moment no one spoke. The classroom hummed quietly, the distant sound of a printer in the office, the faint buzz of overhead lights. Then Ethan said, "Rusty wasn't supposed to be outside that day." His voice was steady but thin. Buddy's ears shifted toward him. Mrs. Carter listened without interrupting. "We had just moved," Ethan continued. "New house. New street." He didn't know the neighborhood yet. His hand tightened slightly in the fur. "I dropped my backpack in the driveway. A car drove past and he ran toward me. I think he thought I was in danger." Buddy's breathing slowed. Steady. Grounded. "I didn't even see the truck," Ethan whispered. "It happened so fast." Silence filled the room. Not heavy, just respectful. Mrs. Carter felt her throat tighten. "That must have been really scary," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "I keep thinking, if I had just picked up my bag faster, or called him sooner." Buddy shifted closer. Without lifting his head, he rested it gently against Ethan's thigh. A quiet anchor. Ethan's shoulders trembled slightly. "My mom says it wasn't my fault," he murmured. "But it feels like it was." Mrs. Carter leaned forward slightly, her voice calm and sure. "Sometimes our hearts try to take responsibility for things they couldn't control," she said. "It's how we make sense of loss." Ethan looked down at Buddy. "He used to sit by my bedroom door every night," he said softly. "After it happened, the house felt empty. Too quiet." Buddy let out a small sigh. Not of sadness, but of understanding. Ethan's hand moved slowly over the dog's back, following the rise and fall of his breathing. "I stopped talking about him after we moved again," he admitted. "Kids at my last school didn't get it. They said it was just a dog." The words lingered in the air. Mrs. Carter shook her head gently. "He wasn't just a dog to you." Ethan met her eyes. "No." Buddy lifted his head slightly, then nudged Ethan's arm. Softly, as if reminding him of something important. Ethan gave a small watery laugh. "He feels the same," he said. Buddy's tail tapped once against the rug. Mrs. Carter watched the subtle exchange. The way Buddy mirrored Ethan's breathing, the way his body leaned in but never overwhelmed. This wasn't excitement. It wasn't coincidence. It was instinct. Protective. Intuitive. The kind of presence that doesn't try to fix pain. Just hold space for it. "Do you miss him every day?" Mrs. Carter asked gently. Ethan nodded. "Especially after school." Buddy's ears flicked. Mrs. Carter noticed. After school. Waiting at the door. A pattern forming. A quiet ache. "You know," she said slowly, "Buddy comes here twice a week. But sometimes, if someone needs extra time, we can make arrangements." Ethan looked at her, hopeful but cautious. Really? She smiled. Really? Buddy shifted upright now, sitting tall beside Ethan. Alert. Present. As if he understood the offer. Ethan leaned his forehead lightly against the dog's shoulder. I don't want to replace Rusty, he whispered again. You don't have to, Mrs. Carter said softly. Love doesn't get replaced. It grows. The late afternoon light warmed the room, casting long shadows across the rug. For the first time since he had stepped into this school, Ethan's posture looked less guarded, less alone. Buddy stayed close, not demanding attention, not performing, just existing beside him. And as Mrs. Carter watched them, boy and dog breathing in quiet unison, she understood something deeply simple. Buddy hadn't been drawn to the door because of a name. He had been drawn to a heart that still carried unfinished grief. And sometimes, that's all it takes. The first afternoon Buddy stayed late felt different from the others. The final bell had rung. Lockers slammed in uneven rhythm. Children spilled out toward buses and waiting parents. And then slowly the building quieted. Sunlight stretched low through the hallway windows, painting the floor in long golden stripes. The air smelled faintly of pencil shavings and cafeteria bread. Inside room 12, Ethan sat cross-legged on the reading rug. Buddy lay beside him. Not alert now. Not searching. Just present. Mrs. Carter moved quietly at her desk, sorting papers, giving the two of them space without leaving entirely. The room felt softer in the late day light. Slower. Ethan ran his fingers gently through Buddy's fur. Up, down. Slow, steady strokes. You don't have to sit by the door anymore, he murmured quietly. Buddy's ears flicked at the sound of his voice. Ethan smiled faintly. I'm right here. The dog shifted slightly, turning his body so that his back rested lightly against Ethan's knee. It wasn't accidental. It was grounding. Contact. Warmth. Ethan's shoulders lowered, just a little. The past week had changed something. Not dramatically. Not in loud, obvious ways. But in small, steady ones. He had started raising his hand in class. Not often. But once or twice. He had eaten lunch at a table instead of alone near the wall. He had written a short story about a golden retriever who guarded a lighthouse. And this time he hadn't folded the paper away when someone asked about it. Mrs. Carter had noticed. Buddy had noticed too. Every time Ethan entered a room now, Buddy's body language softened instantly. His tail would move in that same slow, deliberate rhythm. His posture relaxed. Recognition. But it wasn't just the dog recognizing the boy. It was the boy recognizing something in himself. The school counselor had stopped by earlier that week during one of Buddy's visits. She had sat quietly nearby as Ethan spoke, halting at first, then more fluidly. Grief had a way of locking words behind walls. But Buddy seemed to hold a key. When Ethan's voice wavered, Buddy would lift his head. When Ethan's breathing quickened, Buddy would shift closer. When Ethan fell silent, Buddy would simply stay. No pressure. No expectations. Just presence. Now in the quiet classroom, Ethan leaned back against the reading shelf. Buddy stretched beside him. Mom says we might get another dog someday, Ethan said softly, staring at the ceiling tiles. Buddy didn't move. Ethan's hand rested on his shoulder. I don't know if I'm ready. His voice didn't carry fear this time. Just honesty. Mrs. Carter looked up from her desk but didn't interrupt. Buddy turned his head slowly and rested his chin on Ethan's thigh again. A familiar gesture now. Ethan smiled. You're not Rusty, he whispered. Buddy's tail gave one slow sweep against the rug. But you're you. The words felt important. Claimed. Accepted. Outside, a car door slammed in the parking lot. Parents arriving. The end of another school day. Ethan didn't flinch at the sound. Weeks ago, sudden noises had made him stiffen, eyes darting, breath catching. Now he stayed relaxed, grounded by the steady warmth beside him. Mrs. Carter walked over slowly and sat across from them. You've been doing something really brave, she said gently. Ethan tilted his head. What? Letting yourself remember without running away from it. He considered that. Buddy yawned softly, a long relaxed stretch, then settled again. I still miss him, Ethan admitted. You always will, Mrs. Carter replied quietly. That's what love does. Ethan nodded, but there was no sharpness in his expression now. The grief had edges before, jagged, unpredictable. Now it felt rounder, softer. A part of him, not something chasing him. Buddy shifted onto his side, exposing his belly slightly, a sign of trust. Ethan laughed quietly. You trust me that much? Buddy's paw twitched. Ethan reached out and scratched gently at his chest. The dog's eyes closed halfway. Content. Mrs. Carter felt a warmth settle deep in her chest. This wasn't replacement. It wasn't forgetting. It was recognition. The kind that heals not by erasing pain, but by standing beside it. A few minutes later, Ethan's mother appeared in the doorway. She paused when she saw them. Her son relaxed on the rug, hand resting easily on golden fur. Something in her expression softened. Ready to go? She asked gently. Ethan looked at Buddy, then back at her. Yeah, he said. He stood slowly. Buddy rose with him. For a moment Ethan hesitated, then wrapped his arms loosely around the dog's neck. Not clinging, just grateful. See you tomorrow, he whispered. Buddy leaned into him, steady and sure. When Ethan stepped back, his posture looked different than it had that first day in the hallway. Straighter, lighter. As he walked toward the door, he didn't look down at the floor. He looked ahead. Buddy remained near the reading rug, watching quietly as Ethan left with his mother. His tail moved once, then twice. Mrs. Carter knelt beside him and rested her hand against his shoulder. You knew, she whispered softly. Buddy blinked up at her. Calm, certain. And in that quiet classroom, as the last light of afternoon faded across the floor, it was clear. Healing doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it sits patiently by a door, waiting to be recognized. Autumn settled in fully by mid-October. The trees outside the school turned deeper shades of amber and crimson. Leaves gathered in careful drifts along the sidewalks. The morning air carried a cool edge, now sharp but clean. Inside room 12, the rhythm of the days had found something new. Something steadier. Buddy still visited twice a week. But now, every time he entered the hallway, he didn't pause at room 14 anymore. He didn't need to. Instead, he walked forward with easy confidence, tail relaxed, gait smooth, as if he already knew exactly where he belonged. Mrs. Carter noticed the difference. So did Ethan. The first time Buddy came directly into room 14 during a scheduled reading collaboration, the class had gone silent in surprise. Mrs. Alvarez had arranged the desks in a loose circle. The children sat cross-legged, curious and wide-eyed. Ethan sat near the window, not in the corner anymore, not apart, just near the light. Buddy entered calmly beside Mrs. Carter, nails clicking softly against the tile. He paused once, scanning the room. Then his gaze landed on Ethan. His tail moved in that same slow, steady rhythm. Ethan smiled without realizing it. Hi, Buddy, he said quietly. Buddy crossed the room, not rushing, not weaving, just walking straight toward him. When he reached Ethan, he sat right at his side, close enough that their shoulders touched. The other children watched with interest. Does he always sit with you? One girl whispered. Ethan shrugged, though his cheeks flushed slightly. Sometimes. Buddy leaned gently against him, claiming nothing, offering everything. Mrs. Carter began the reading session, her voice calm and warm as she guided the children through a story about migration and finding home. The words floated through the room like soft music. Ethan took his turn reading aloud. His voice didn't shake this time. It flowed, clear, steady. Halfway through his paragraph, his fingers brushed lightly against Buddy's fur. Grounding, familiar. When he finished, a small ripple of applause moved around the circle. Ethan looked surprised, then proud. Buddy's tail thumped once in approval. The weeks passed gently. Not dramatic. Not marked by sudden change. But steady. Ethan began staying after school less often, not because he didn't need Buddy, but because he didn't feel as fragile anymore. Grief no longer felt like a wave pulling him under. It felt like a quiet river he had learned to walk beside. One afternoon, as golden light streamed across the hallway, Ethan approached Mrs. Carter while Buddy rested nearby. My mom and I went to the shelter yesterday, he said. Mrs. Carter looked up. Oh, Ethan nodded. Just to look. Buddy's ears flicked at the word shelter. We didn't bring anyone home, Ethan added quickly. But there was this puppy. She kept following me. He smiled, shy but genuine. How did that feel? Mrs. Carter asked. Ethan considered the question carefully. Different, he said. Not like replacing Rusty. Just starting something new. Buddy rose slowly and walked toward him. He sat at Ethan's feet. Ethan knelt down and wrapped his arms gently around the dog's neck. You helped, he whispered. Buddy leaned into him, calm and warm. Outside, a school bus engine rumbled to life. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the parking lot. The world continued moving, steady and bright. Mrs. Carter watched them quietly. She understood something now that she hadn't fully grasped that first morning in the hallway. Buddy hadn't come to erase loss. He hadn't come to replace memory. He had come to bridge something. To remind a boy that love doesn't vanish when a heartbeat stops. Changes shape. It waits. It returns in different ways. That afternoon, Ethan's mother arrived early. She stepped into the classroom and paused, watching her son kneeling beside the golden retriever. There was no tightness in Ethan's shoulders now. No guarded expression. Just ease. When Ethan stood, he didn't cling this time. He hugged Buddy briefly, confident, balanced. See you Thursday, he said. Buddy's tail moved in a slow arc. As Ethan walked toward the door with his mother, he glanced back once. Not because he was afraid to leave, but because he wanted to. Buddy remained near the rug, watching until the door closed softly behind them. Then he turned and walked back to Mrs. Carter's side. No hesitation. No searching. His work, at least this chapter of it, felt complete. Mrs. Carter knelt and pressed her forehead lightly against his. You knew, she murmured again. Buddy blinked slowly. Content. The late afternoon light spilled across the classroom floor, wrapping the room in warmth. Outside, a few leaves tumbled gently across the pavement, carried by a soft breeze. Somewhere down the hallway, a locker shut. A distant laugh echoed. Life continuing. Healing unfolding quietly in its own time. And in that gentle stillness, it was clear. Some bonds are meant to find each other. Even after loss. Even after years. 'Cause sometimes, love waits patiently by a door. Until someone is ready to open it.